Welcome to the Archive of Echoes. Please select the log entry you wish to relive. Acknowledged. Calibrating. Prepare to dive. Bleed the Viper by Andrew Provencher. Chapter 1. Enter the Snake. Rain pattered down onto the slate roof of the ramshackle shack that served as the cover the man was using to protect himself from the elements. In the dim illumination of the night, the phosphorescent glow of chemicals served to highlight the face of the one working with the concoctions. His face was grim and pale, worn with creases of years of living with a heavy burden. His hair was brown and straight, just beginning to recede from the front of his brow. What stood out most, however, was his eyes. They were the color of honey mixed with amber, and his pupils, which were where the oddity of them truly stood out, for he had the eyes of a snake or a cat, depending on the light at the time. These eyes made him able to see in the dim illumination as though it were a sunny day, and came in handy during his work. He carefully lifted a decanter of some glowing green liquid. With his leather-gloved hand, and with a measured precision, poured it into a smaller vial of foul-smelling purple fluid. The chemicals reacted with each other, turning into a pale blue. He put a cork inside the vial, stopping it up, and slid the vial in with the others on the bandolier attached to his leather armor, dyed black as pitch and stained to hide any scent it might have had. On his hip was a sheath, and inside a well-worn dagger. Strapped to his back was a sword that was almost too big for a man of his size. Slick rainwater coursed down the steel blade, and fell off in droplets mixed with the alchemic coating he had used to grease the blade. "Damn this rain," thought Viper. He settled in for the time being. For a while his eyes might be good, even he could not track in a downpour. He had been following his quarry now for 2 days, and by the hells if this beast wasn't more intelligent than any other troll he had ever tried to track. It had eluded him through the forest close to the town where he had been contracted to kill the beast, and led him on a goose chase through the stone quarry, using its natural camouflage to throw off his training. On one end, the rain would slow him down, yet he also knew that the beast would be easier to track once the prints of the quarry were cemented into the muddy ground. Viper huddled next to his tools and waited for the rain to stop, smirking with a knowing smile as the sound of the drops of rain began to cease. It would not be long till the storm ended, and taking that solace, he commenced to place his tools and apparatus into his rucksack and sling it over his back. He was ready to get back to work, to take his mind off the events that were causing him some level of mental breakdown. Viper pushed them to the back of his mind, and he steeled himself for the trials to come. It was still dark outside when he rose and exited from the shack that had been his shelter from the elements. Much as he had planned, in the crisp post-rain air, he could smell the beast. Its festering, rotten flesh would have made less skilled men cringe. In the dew and dirt, which had become a thick sludge like mud, he could see the clear, four-clawed giant footprints that made up the tracks of the trail he would soon follow. There was nothing now to be done but for the hunt to begin. The Viper lowered himself into the mud, pulling back the leather cowl covering his face, and inhaling the horrid smell of an animal deeply. The scent of consumed corpses wafted into his nasal passages, and his brain worked to process the input. As if led by some force unseen, he knew where the beast would be, and it would not escape him this time. Viper crouched and began to follow the tracks, winding through the trees of the defined dirt road and into the wilderness. The troll had left clear marks of disarrayed bushes and undergrowth. Either it had not expected to be followed, or it was desperate to be away from the one that now hunted it. Both signs showed a level of intelligence that this monster should not have. This thought worried Viper, but he let it pass and resumed the tracking. Not a difficult task with the mistakes in stealth that the monster had made. After a time, the trail began to lead upward, and off in the distance, Viper could see a rocky outcropping. The stones jutted up in a jagged formation, pressing against the dark sky like the pearly teeth in a raven-furred animal's maw. He thought to himself that it was likely he had spotted the first glimpse of the beast's den. As if to confirm this theory, his snake-like eyes picked out movement ahead. He continued to crouch, using the skill of a hunter twice his age and experience, aided as he was by his own unique countenance. The approach toward the outcropping revealed a sight that was both sobering yet appalling, for around the base of the rocks was the entrance to a cave, and around that entrance the rancid remain of the monster's most recent kill, and judging from the shape of the corpse, it had once walked on 2 legs. Other remains lay strewn about the entrance in piles that seemed oddly organized. It appeared to be a horrific shrine to the troll's prowess, a warning to any potential territorial challengers of the monstrous or mundane variety. It was good that he had taken this job. His pockets would be heftier, and as an aside, the town would be safer without this man-killer in its vicinity. Viper navigated down the outcropping to the lower plateau of stone, the rocks now colored of ash stained with a deep mixture of maroon and crimson blood. Viper was careful to avoid the pitfalls of rancid meat around that might have contained bone or viscera that would crack or squelch, giving away his secluded position. Trolls were known to have uncanny hearing. Viper sat behind a rock at the base and peered around it toward the pitch-black entrance. He realized no light would be further into the cave past this point. This, however, was one of his standard hunting strategies, and against a monster that could not see in the dark, might have proved to render this job a simple task. Even so, he followed with practiced ease. His plan, reaching to the bandolier of vials strapped across his chest, he withdrew one of the vials, containing an amber-colored fluid laced with slight fluorescent specks within. Viper uncorked the stopper of the small glass container and pulled the shroud covering his mouth aside. Sighing heavily, he tossed the concoction back with a quick swig and grimaced at its bitter taste. For a moment nothing happened. Then crisscrossing lines of an inky nature flowed through his veins and ran through his body. His eyes began to alter. They took on an almond shape, becoming even more animal-like, and took on a golden hue. The world around him was no longer dark, not even dim. He saw in shadow as if it were high noon. Viper corked and returned the now empty vial to his bandolier, making certain it was securely fastened. He then dropped his rucksack of tools down to the floor behind the boulder, hiding it in the brush, wanting to rid himself of any excess weight. He reached beside himself and unstrapped the sheath of the sword on his back, and amazingly carried it in one hand. Grazing over his leg, he found the sheath containing his knife where he had left it. Viper replaced the cowl, leaving only his eyes visible, grateful for his nose being covered, as the smell of death, though eased with years of experience, still offended his nostrils. Satisfied that his gear was in check, he was prepared. Viper began to emerge from behind the boulder and sidled his way around the macabre grounds to the entrance of the cave. At the entrance he stood and craned his head around the corner, seeing that the cave dipped, descending and leading into the antechamber below. Unfortunately, he could perceive no other details from his vantage point, and would have to improvise based on the situation. With that, Viper rounded the corner and began his descent. The soft dirt of the trampled cavern shifted beneath his boots, but did not stick to them nor impede his progress. The roof of the cave was lined with tiny bats that gave the illusion that the roof was moving and undulating, as though the cavern itself was a living being, slowly beckoning him come deeper into its silent, shadowy embrace. Viper slowly prodded along, breathing softly so as not to interfere with his own sense of hearing, desperate to get the drop on the monster if at all possible. He reached the main antechamber with no difficulty, and saw many tunnels that connected to this area. Time for another trade secret, it seemed, Viper thought in the cave. He closed his eyes and focused on the sound, trying to shut out all but the echo he wanted. Without the visual stimulus clouding and forcing his perceptions, Viper heard the sound of water dripping from the stalactites, hitting the base of the cavern below. He pushed it aside and focused harder, began to feel rather than hear his own heartbeat, soft and slow, as he quieted himself from the world around him. Still not what he wanted. He pushed it aside. Still as a statue, he dropped into a near trance-like state. Then finally, he saw it. In his mind it formed a picture, consisting of echoes. The vibrations of the heartbeat of the troll, perceived in this way, caused him to know the direction he would need to take next. The monster was down the leftmost tunnel, and far as he could tell, judging from the heart rate, it was awake and would most certainly not welcome any guests that impeded on its home. Another echo archived. I look forward to seeing you again. Goodbye for now, until next time you log in. Echoes fade slower with you here.